The world had shrunk to a screaming cacophony of metal and warning tones. Major Eva Valkyrie Rostova felt the vibration not in her hands on the control stick, but deep in her bones, a resonant hum that was part aircraft, part her own thundering. Heartbeat. Outside the reinforced cockpit of her A-10 Warthog, the sky was a maelstrom of fire and smoke. Tracers, like angry red hornets, stitched lines across the bruised twilight, searching for her. Below, on the jagged, rocky terrain of the Zarqawi Valley, a pinned-down Special Forces team was about to be overrun. Their frantic calls for air support had grown weaker, punctuated by the sharp crack of enemy fire and the dull thud of mortar rounds landing closer and closer to their position. Valkyrie, this is Ogre 1, a strained voice crackled through her headset. They're everywhere. We are down to our last mags. We can't hold. Eva's eyes, a startlingly clear blue against her dust-streaked face, scanned the chaos. Her instruments flickered. One of her engines was running rough after taking a piece of shrapnel, and a persistent, high-pitched alarm warned of a hydraulic pressure drop. She was flying a relic, a machine built for a different era of warfare, a beast of burden in an age of sleek, untouchable predators. And she wouldn't have traded it for anything. Hang on, Ogre 1, she said, her voice a bedrock of calm in the storm. I'm coming in. Danger close. The term was an understatement. The enemy was so entangled with the friendly forces that any mistake, any deviation of a single degree, would mean killing the very men she was trying to save. This was what the A-10 was built for. Not for dogfights at 30,000 feet, but for this, getting low, getting dirty, and spitting righteous fury from its 7-barreled GAU-8 Avenger cannon. She rolled the Warthog hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. The ground rushed up to meet her, a terrifying, exhilarating blur of rock and shadow. She could see them now, muzzle flashes winking from behind boulders, the dark shapes of men swarming the American position. Her thumb moved to the weapons control panel, her fingers dancing over the switches with a familiarity born of 1,000 hours of practice. She felt a grim satisfaction settle over her. This was her church. This was her sermon. And the text for today was written in 30mm depleted uranium. Colonel Davies is going to have my wings for this, she muttered to herself, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. The thought was a fleeting distraction, a reminder of the world beyond this valley of death. The world of polished desks, political maneuvering, and men who thought they understood war because they had read about it in a briefing book. She lined up her run, the iconic BRRT of the Avenger already echoing in her mind. The sound that pilots called the voice of God. The sound that struck terror into the hearts of those on the ground. She was no longer just a pilot. She was an extension of the machine, a Valkyrie descending from a metallic Valhalla to choose the slain. And as she squeezed the trigger, unleashing a torrent of incandescent rage upon the enemy below, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The alarm screamed, the engine coughed, but the gun worked perfectly. 2 weeks earlier, the air at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada had been thick with a different kind of tension. It wasn't the life-or-death pressure of combat, but the slow, grinding friction of professional pride against institutional arrogance. Major Eva Rostova stood at parade rest in the cavernous briefing room, the air conditioning doing little to cool the heat rising in her chest. Her flight suit felt stiff and formal, a costume for a play she had no interest in performing. Across the polished mahogany table, Colonel Marcus Davies leaned back in his leather chair, a portrait of condescending authority. He was a man sculpted by the Air Force's political machinery, sharp jaw, silvering temples, and eyes that assessed everything not for its tactical value, but for its potential impact on his career trajectory. He was a fighter pilot by trade, a former F-16 jock who saw the future in speed, stealth, and standoff munitions. In his eyes, Eva and her squadron of A-10 Thunderbolt IS, the Warthogs, were dinosaurs. Slow, ugly, and embarrassingly low-tech. They were a budget line item he was eager to cut, a relic of the Cold War he believed had no place in modern, networked warfare. Major Rostova, he began, his voice smooth and laced with a dismissive patience that set Eva's teeth on edge. We are running a joint training exercise with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. They need close air support. Fast movers on station, ready to prosecute targets on demand. It's a showcase for our new integrated battle network. High speed, data links, satellite targeting pods, the works. He gestured vaguely at a large screen displaying a complex web of digital icons. It's about surgical precision, Major. Speed and lethality. Eva's posture didn't change, but her jaw tightened. She knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a simple briefing. It was a public execution of her squadron's relevance. The room was filled with pilots from the F-35 and F-16 wings, all of them young, cocky, and disciples of Davies's high-tech gospel. They watched her with a mixture of pity and amusement. The old guard. The mudhen driver, Colonel, Eva, said, her voice steady and clear. The Hogs are the premier close air support platform in the world. We don't need a satellite to find the enemy. We use our eyes. We can stay on station for hours, not minutes. When a ranger on the ground is in trouble, he doesn't care about data links. He cares about a pilot who can see him, talk to him, and put rounds exactly where he needs them, right now. A low chuckle rippled through the F-35 pilots. Davies held up a hand, feigning magnanimity. Eva, please. We all respect the A-10's legacy. It was a fine machine in its day. But its day is over. It's a flying tractor. It's vulnerable. A single man with a shoulder-fired missile, and you're a fireball on a hillside. These new systems, they allow us to strike from altitude, from safety. We don't risk pilots and billion-dollar assets playing cowboy down in the weeds. The word cowboy was a deliberate barb, and it landed with precision. It implied recklessness, a lack of discipline. It was the ultimate insult to a pilot who prided herself on her meticulous, almost obsessive, professionalism. With all due respect, Colonel, Eva countered, her voice dropping a notch, losing its formal edge and gaining a core of steel. My squadron has the highest combat effectiveness rating for CAS missions in the entire command. We've never lost an asset because we were playing cowboy. We've saved hundreds of lives because we were willing to get down in the weeds. The A-10 is built around a titanium bathtub. It's designed to take hits and keep flying. Can your F-35s do that? Can they operate from a dirt road? Can they loiter over a firefight for 3 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to engage? Davies's smile tightened. He was losing control of the narrative. This isn't a debate, Major. This exercise is about showcasing our 5th-generation capabilities. It's about securing future funding. It's about politics. He finally said the quiet part out loud. Frankly, the A-10 is a public relations nightmare. It looks antiquated. It doesn't fit the image we are trying to project. So we are sacrificing combat effectiveness for a better press release. Eva asked, the question hanging in the air like a live grenade, the silence in. The room was electric. The younger pilots shifted uncomfortably. This was more than just a professional disagreement. It was a clash of philosophies, of generations. Davies's face hardened, the mask of civility slipping away to reveal the cold ambition beneath. Your squadron will be on standby, Major, for search and rescue. If one of our real assets gets into trouble, you can go pick them up. But for the primary CAS role, I need speed. I need technology. I need something that looks good for the generals. He waved a dismissive hand. Frankly, for this mission, any jet will do, as long as it's not yours. The insult was so blatant, so profoundly disrespectful, that it stole the air from Eva's lungs. Any jet will do. He had just equated her entire life's work, the legacy of her aircraft, the skill of her pilots, to nothing. He had dismissed them as irrelevant, interchangeable parts in his grand political game. The other pilots looked away, some with a flicker of sympathy, others with open smirks. She was being publicly humiliated, cast aside in favor of newer, shinier toys. A fire ignited in Eva's soul. It wasn't a hot, reckless anger, but a cold, focused fury. It was the kind of fire that forged steel. She held the colonel's gaze, her blue eyes like chips of ice. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply gave him the crispest, most regulation-perfect salute he had ever seen. Yes, Colonel, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion save for a chillingly precise obedience. Yes, she turned and walked out of the briefing room. The silence followed her. She could feel their eyes on her back. The pity. The scorn. She walked past the sleek, beautiful F-35s parked on the flight line, their stealthy angles and pristine canopies gleaming in the Nevada sun. They were the future, everyone said. They were untouchable. She continued walking, her boots crunching on the gravel, until she reached a section of the tarmac. And there it was. Her warthog. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't sleek. It was squat, powerful, and brutally functional. Its nose was painted. With the snarling teeth of a predator, and below the cockpit, stenciled in small, neat letters, were the names of the soldiers it had saved. It was covered in grease stains and patched with mismatched paint. It wore its scars with pride. It was a warrior, not a show pony. She reached out and laid a hand on its cool, metal skin. The plane wasn't just a machine to her. It was a promise. A promise to the soldiers on the ground that they would never be left behind. Colonel Davies could have his politics and his shiny jets. He could play his games in the stratosphere. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her marrow, that a day would come when the data links would fail, the satellites would go blind, and the sleek, untouchable jets would be useless, and on that day, when the men on the ground were screaming for help, they wouldn't be asking for any jet. They would be praying for the sound of a warthog's wings. They would be praying for the BRRT. She looked up at the sky, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. "We'll see, Colonel," she whispered to the empty air. "We'll see who's a relic then." The training exercise was a disaster waiting to happen, and Eva could see it coming from a mile away. The scenario was designed to be complex, a multi-layered simulation of a near-peer conflict. The Rangers were tasked with seizing a mock village in the vast desert training area, while the opposing force, or OPFA, was equipped with sophisticated electronic warfare and anti-aircraft systems. It was the perfect environment to test the F-35's networked capabilities. On paper, Eva's squadron was relegated to a remote corner of the base, their A-10s parked like forgotten farm equipment. Their role was simple: listen to the radio, stay out of the way, and be ready to simulate a combat search and rescue (CSAR) mission if one of the real jets was notionally shot down. It was a demeaning task, the aviation equivalent of being told to sit at the kids' table. Her crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Salty Petrovsky, spat a stream of chewing tobacco juice onto the tarmac. "It's a joke, Major. A damn joke. We got the most experienced CAS pilots in the Air Force sitting here playing with their thumbs while those Nintendo jockeys go out there and try not to scratch the paint on their billion-dollar toys." Eva was checking the feed lines on a Maverick. Missile, her movements economical and precise. Politics, salty. The colonel needs to justify his budget. He needs to show the brass that his new toys are worth the price tag. "What he's gonna show him is how to get a bunch of Rangers killed," Salty grumbled, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. "That integrated network thing is a house of cards. One good jammer, and all those fancy screens go blank. Those F-35 pilots. They can't fly without their GPS. They can't find a target without a laser dot showing them where to look. You put them in a real soup, where everything's gone to hell, and they'll be as useless as a screen door on a submarine." Eva knew he was right. She had flown with the new generation of pilots. They were brilliant with the technology, but they were utterly dependent on it. They lacked the fundamental, seat-of-the-pants skills that pilots of her era had been forced to master. The ability to read a map, to navigate by landmarks, to identify a target with their own eyes. The exercise began just after dawn. Eva and her pilots gathered in their makeshift ready room, a cramped trailer with a bank of radio receivers. They listened as the F-35s, callsign Night Flight, checked in with the air controller and began their high-altitude orbits. The plan was for them to use their advanced sensors to identify enemy positions and feed the data to the Rangers on the ground, then surgically eliminate threats with guided bombs dropped from 20,000 feet. For the first hour, everything went according to the colonel's script. The Knights called out targets, and simulated bombs were reported as hitting their marks. Davies's voice occasionally came over the command channel, smooth and self-congratulatory. Then, the OPFA commander, a wily old fox who had been playing these games for decades, made his move. The radio traffic suddenly dissolved into a blizzard of static. "Night 1, say again, you're unreadable," the air controller said. His voice tight with concern. The garbled transmission, shot through with electronic noise, was the only reply. On the ground, the lead Ranger element, callsign Hammer 1, was in trouble. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," a voice yelled, breaking through the chaos. "We are taking heavy fire from a fortified position, grid square Delta 9er. We have multiple casualties. We have no comms with our air support. Night Flight is not responding." In the trailer, Eva and her pilots exchanged grim looks. Salty's prediction was coming true. The OPFA had activated a powerful jamming array, and the F-35's sophisticated data network had collapsed. They were flying blind. "This is Valkyrie Actual," Eva said, keying her own MIC on the command channel. "Colonel Davies, my squadron is available. We can be airborne in 5 minutes." The reply was laced with fury. "Negative, Valkyrie. Stand down. I will not have your rust buckets complicating the situation. Night flight will re-establish. Contact." "Colonel, those men are dying." Eva shot back, her professionalism cracking. "They need fire support now, not when your pilots figure out how to read a compass." "That's an order, Major. You are to remain on the ground. Do you read me?" Eva looked at the faces of her pilots. They were coiled springs of frustration and readiness. They could hear the desperation in the Rangers' voices. They could practically smell the cordite. To be a pilot, a true attack pilot, and to be told to stand down when soldiers were dying, it was a violation of their very soul. Another voice cut through the static, this one from the Ranger commander on the ground. It was raw with panic. "We are being overrun. I say again, we are being overrun. If anyone can hear this, we need immediate extraction. We need BRT. For God's sake, just give us a gun run." The plea was a physical blow. He hadn't asked for a smart bomb. He hadn't asked for a GPS coordinate. He had asked, by name, for the one thing only they could provide. The sound. The promise. The A-10. Eva made a decision. It was the kind of decision that ended careers. It was the kind of decision that got you court-martialed. But it was also the kind of decision that saved lives. She stood up and looked at her second-in-command. "Major, you're in charge here. You didn't hear me give any orders. You're going to have your hands full with a faulty radio." She turned to her wingman, a young captain named Rico Diaz. "Rico, you with me?" Rico's eyes were blazing. He just nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Salty." Eva yelled, already running for the door. "Light him up. We are going hunting." As she sprinted across the tarmac towards her waiting warthog, she could hear Colonel Davies's voice screaming her call sign over the radio, ordering her, threatening her. She ignored it. The only voice she cared about now was the one from the ground, the one pleading for help. The canopy closed over her head, shutting out the colonel's impotent rage. The twin engines whined to life, a familiar and comforting roar. As she taxied onto the runway without clearance, she knew she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. She was defying a direct order from a superior officer in the middle of a high-profile exercise. But as the A-10's wheels left the pavement and she banked hard towards the mountains, a strange sense of peace settled over her. She was done with politics. She was done with proving her worth. She was a warrior, flying a warrior's machine, and she was going to do what she was born to do. The consequences could wait. The only question now was, could she get there in time? And what would be waiting for her when she did? The OPFA had already proven they were more capable than anyone expected. By flying into their teeth, she wasn't just risking her career, she was risking her life and the life of her wingman, on the belief that her old, ugly, antiquated jet could still make a difference. The sound that came next would change everything. The flight to the training area was a tense, low-level sprint. Eva kept her warthog, call sign Valkyrie 1, mere feet above the desert floor, the scrub brush and sage a green-brown blur just beyond her wingtips. Her wingman, Rico, was glued to her 6 o'clock position, his own A-10 a dark, menacing shape against the bright sky. They were flying under the OPFOR's radar, literally. The sophisticated systems designed to detect high-altitude stealth fighters were completely blind to 2 aircraft screaming through the canyons like angry ghosts. The irony was not lost on her. Colonel Davies's billion-dollar solution was neutralized, while her flying tractor was about to plow a field he couldn't even see. "Valkyrie 1, this is Hammer 1, the voice of the Ranger commander crackled. In her ears, weaker now, strained. "Be advised, OPFA has armor. I repeat, we have T-72 analogs moving on our position from the north." Eva's blood ran cold. This changed everything. The exercise parameters hadn't included tanks. The Rangers, with only light anti-tank weapons, would be annihilated. This was no longer a simulation that had gone wrong. It was a massacre in the making. Someone had changed the rules of the game without telling the players. Was this part of the OPFA commander's plan, or was it something more sinister? A test. A trap. Copy that, Hammer, Eva responded, her voice tight. Hold on. How far are they? Too damn close. 300 meters and closing. We can hear their engines. Eva pushed the throttles forward. The A-10's engines, never designed for speed, groaned in protest, but the aircraft surged with a stubborn determination that mirrored her own. She and Rico crested a low mesa, and the scene unfolded below them like a diorama of disaster. The mock village was a smoking ruin. The Rangers were pinned down behind a low stone wall, their muzzle flashes looking pitifully small against the hulking shapes of 3 tanks advancing on them, kicking up plumes of dust. Rico, you see what I see? Eva asked, her voice dangerously calm. Affirmative, lead. 3 big, ugly targets. Looks like they brought the whole Warsaw Pact to a knife fight. Let's even the odds, Eva said. I'll take the lead tank. You take the one on the right. We'll come back for the third. Arm Maverick. She felt the familiar clunk as the AGM-65 Maverick missile engaged on its pylon. In her heads-up display, the targeting reticle locked onto the lead tank with a satisfying green box. The tank was a perfect, textbook target, its crew completely oblivious to the angel of death descending upon them. They were looking for threats. On the ground, or from 20,000 feet. They never thought to look in the canyons. Valkyrie 1, rifle, she called out, squeezing the trigger. The Maverick leaped from its rail with a whoosh of smoke and fire, a brilliant white spear against the desert landscape. She didn't wait to watch it hit. She broke hard left, jinking to avoid any potential anti-aircraft fire, her eyes already scanning for the next target. Valkyrie 2, rifle. Rico's voice followed a second later. Behind her, 2 massive fireballs erupted, engulfing the lead. Tanks. The explosions were silent from her cockpit, but she felt the concussive force ripple through the airframe. The third tank, its commander suddenly realizing his mortality, began to reverse, its turret swinging wildly, searching for the unseen attacker. He's all yours, Rico, Eva said. With pleasure. Re-engaging. On the ground, the effect was instantaneous. The Rangers, who had been moments from oblivion, let out a ragged cheer that was clearly audible over the comms. Yeah, get some, someone screamed, but their celebration was short-lived. As Rico lined up his shot, the sky above them was suddenly filled with a new threat. 2 sleek, aggressor-marked F-16s, the OPFOR's air-to-air fighters, dove out of the sun. They had been waiting, lurking at high altitude, a trap for anyone foolish enough to respond to the Rangers' pleas. Valkyrie, break right. Bandits. 6 o'clock high. Rico yelled. Eva hauled back on the stick, her A-10 groaning as it clawed for altitude. The Warthog was a mudfighter, a brawler. It was never meant to dance with nimble, supersonic interceptors like the F-16. This was a mismatch of epic proportions. It was like putting a heavyweight boxer in the ring with a martial arts master. Jettison stores. Eva commanded, her mind racing. They were too heavy, too slow. She punched the emergency release button, and her remaining bombs and external fuel tank dropped away, lightening the aircraft. Go to guns. Defensive spiral. They were now in a fight for their lives. The F-16s were faster, more maneuverable, and had superior radar and missiles. Eva and Rico had one advantage. The A-10 could turn on a dime. Its massive, straight wings, designed for low-speed loitering, allowed it to perform maneuvers that would tear the wings off a faster jet. The 2 Warthogs entered a descending spiral, a classic defensive maneuver, forcing the F-16s to overshoot. An air-to-air missile streaked past Eva's canopy, a fiery exclamation point in the sky. The F-16s were toying with them, making high-speed passes, trying to get a lock. They're hurting us, Rico panted, the strain of the high G turns evident in his voice. They're pushing us south, away from the Rangers. Eva realized he was right. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a coordinated tactic. The tanks were the bait. The F-16s were the cage. And below, the third tank had recovered its nerve and was once again advancing on the pinned-down soldiers. A cold fury washed over Eva. This was Colonel Davies's modern warfare in action. A perfectly synchronized, multi-domain trap. And she had flown right into it. But the Colonel, and the OPFA, had made one critical miscalculation. They had underestimated the sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness of an A-10 pilot. Negative, Rico. Eva said, her voice a low growl. We are not running. We are going to finish the job. Lead, you're crazy. We can't fight them and hit the tank. We don't have to fight them, Eva said, a wild, desperate plan forming in her mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was pure warthog. We just have to make them get out of our way. Follow my lead. And trust the hog. She did something no fighter pilot in their right mind would ever do. She stopped evading. She rolled her A-10 wings level and pointed its nose directly at the last remaining tank on the ground. She was ignoring the two fighters on her tail and flying straight and steady, making herself the easiest target in the world. Eva, what are you doing? Rico screamed. They've got a lock. Just wait, she said through gritted teeth. Her altitude was dropping rapidly. 5,000 feet. 3,000 feet. The ground rushed up. The F-16s were closing in for the kill, their pilots surely incredulous at her stupidity. The RWR, the radar warning receiver, in her cockpit shrieked, a solid, unending tone that meant an enemy missile was in the air and actively guiding on her. This was it. The moment of truth. Now, Rico. Flares. And hit the deck. She slammed a button on her control panel, and the A-10 spewed a brilliant cloud of incandescent flares, a desperate attempt to decoy the incoming missile. In the same motion, she pushed the stick forward, diving straight for the ground. The G-forces were brutal, trying to pull her out of her seat. The world went from a panorama of sky and earth to a terrifying close-up of rock and sand. The F-16 pilot, faced with a target that was simultaneously deploying countermeasures and about to smash itself into a cliff, had a split-second decision to make. He couldn't follow her into that dive. His faster, less forgiving aircraft would never pull out in time. He broke off the attack, his missile losing its lock in the cloud of flares and the ground clutter. Eva, however, was in her element. She pulled back on the stick at the last possible second, her warthog's belly scraping the tops of the sagebrush. She leveled out less than 50 feet from the ground, the sheer rock face of a canyon wall flashing past her right wing. She was now flying inside the canyon, shielded from the F-16s above. And directly in front of her, filling her entire windscreen, was the T-72. Its crew, seeing the monstrous jet appear out of nowhere, were frozen in shock. There was no time for a missile. No time for a bomb. There was only time for the gun. Her thumb found the trigger. B-A-T. The sound was apocalyptic. It wasn't just a noise. It was a physical force that shook the very air. A solid stream of 30mm cannon shells, firing at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, slammed into the tank. It wasn't like a Hollywood explosion. It was a systematic, brutal disassembly. The armor peeled away like tinfoil. The turret was ripped from its housing. The entire vehicle seemed to simply disintegrate into a cloud of fire, smoke, and shredded metal. Eva pulled up, the wreckage of the tank passing beneath her. She had done it. Against all odds, she had saved the Rangers, but her relief was instantly shattered. Valkyrie 1, this is the air boss. Colonel Davies's voice, now cold and dripping with venom, cut through the radio. He had seen everything. You are to cease all combat actions immediately. You will return to base. And you, Major Rostova, can consider your career over. You will be stripped of your command and court-martialed for gross insubordination and reckless endangerment. You disobeyed a direct order and destroyed millions of dollars in OPFOR assets. The threat was real. She had won the battle, but she was about to lose the war. She had saved the men, but she had damned herself. As she banked the A-10 to head for home, a new alarm began to blare in her cockpit. It wasn't a missile warning. It was something she had never heard before. A small, previously dark screen on her console flickered to life, displaying a symbol she didn't recognize and a string of encrypted data. Rico, you getting this? She asked, her voice laced with a new kind of dread. Yeah, lead. What the hell is that? It's not one of ours. It was a data link signal, but it wasn't from their network, and it wasn't from the OPFOR's known systems. It was something else, something hidden, and it was strong. It was piggybacking on their own secure communications frequency, a digital ghost in their machine. Before Eva could process this new mystery, Salty's voice, frantic and terrified, came over the squadron's private channel. Major, you need to see this. The satellite imagery from the training area, the wreckage of that third tank. It's not a T-72 analog. Major, the thermal signature, The armor composition. It's not one of ours. It's not Russian. I don't know what it is. But it's real. Eva's blood turned to ice. A real tank? An unidentified piece of military hardware in the middle of a US training exercise? The sophisticated jamming, the perfectly executed trap, the F-16s that fought with. A cold, calculated lethality that felt different. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a drill, and the mysterious data link signal that was now flashing on her screen, it wasn't coming from the training area. It was coming from inside Creech Air Force Base. Someone on the inside was feeding live, real-time tactical data to the unknown forces in the valley. The betrayal wasn't on the battlefield. It was right behind them. The colonel's threats suddenly seemed insignificant. A court-martial was the least of her problems. She had stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. And the only evidence was the strange signal blinking on her console and the word of a grizzled crew chief who had just identified a ghost. Who would ever believe her? Part 3. The ghost in the machine. The flight back to Creech was the longest of Eva's life. Every minute that ticked by felt like an hour. Colonel Davies's threats echoed in her helmet, a venomous counterpoint to the steady, rhythmic pulse of the unknown data signal on her screen. A court-martial was a certainty. The end of her career was a foregone conclusion. But as she stared at the cryptic symbol, a cold dread settled in her stomach that had nothing to do with her own future. Salty's words replayed in her mind. It's real.an unidentified, advanced armored vehicle, crewed by an unknown force, operating with impunity in the heart of a secure American military training range. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, the evidence was strewn across the desert floor in a heap of smoldering, shredded metal, courtesy of her GAU-8. She hadn't just broken the rules of an exercise. She had fired on a real, unidentified combatant. She had, in effect, fired the first shot in a war nobody knew had started. As they approached the base, the signal grew stronger. Using her onboard systems, she triangulated the source. The result made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't coming from the main command center or the air traffic control tower. It was emanating from a small, nondescript communications hub attached to the F-35 squadron's hangar. The hangar that housed Colonel Davies's prized fifth-generation fighters. The very heart of his high-tech vision for the future of air power. Rico, she said over their private channel. The signal is coming from the Night Squadron's comm shack. I need you to do something for me. When we land, create a diversion. Declare an emergency, a hydraulic failure, anything. I need you to draw the ground crews and the fire trucks to your jet. I need 2 minutes. Rico. Unseen. Eva, what are you going to do? Rico's voice was tight with worry. Davies will have the MPs waiting for you on the tarmac. Let him, she said, her resolve hardening. He's expecting me to fight for my career. He's not expecting me to be looking for a traitor. They touched down on the main runway. Just as planned, Rico's voice came over the tower frequency, calm but urgent. Tower, Valkyrie 2 is declaring an emergency. I have a massive hydraulic leak. Repeat, I am losing hydraulic pressure. I need the crash crew on my position, now. It was the perfect diversion. As fire trucks and maintenance vehicles scrambled towards Rico's A-10 at the far end of the runway, Eva killed her engines on a secondary taxiway, hidden from the main flight line by a row of hardened aircraft shelters. She popped her canopy and, under the cloak of the orchestrated chaos, slipped out of the cockpit. She didn't run towards her own squadron's area. She ran towards the enemy. The F-35 hangar was a temple of modern technology. Clean, sterile, and eerily quiet. Eva flattened herself against the building's metal wall, her heart pounding against her ribs. The comm shack was a small, windowless annex connected to the main structure. A single keypad lock stood between her and the source of the signal. She had no code, no keycard. She had only a hunch, and the cold fury that was now her constant companion. She remembered something Salty had told her once, a grumbling complaint about the base's new security upgrades. Fancy new locks, but they all got the same master override code for the fire department. 9-1-1 fire. Can you believe that? $1 million system, and the master key is something a 5-year-old could guess. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. Her fingers, slick with sweat, punched in the numbers on the keypad, 9113473. The light on the panel blinked green. The lock clicked open. She slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her. The room was small, filled with racks of humming servers and glowing monitors. And sitting at a console in the center of the room was a man she knew. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson. He was one of Davies's F-35 squadron leaders, a golden boy, a fast-tracker with a perfect record and a condescending smile he reserved for pilots of lesser aircraft. He was so engrossed in the screen in front of him that he didn't hear her enter dot on his screen. Eva saw it all. Live tactical data from the training area, the positions of the Rangers, the movements of the OPFA, and a secure, encrypted chat window open to an unknown recipient. Peterson was typing furiously, Asset 3 destroyed by legacy aircraft. Repeat, A-10 engaged and destroyed Asset 3. Pilot disobeyed direct orders. Unforeseen complication. Rostova is the pilot. She is a problem. The message on the screen was a confession. Asset 3. That's what they called the tank. It wasn't OPFA. It was an asset. Their asset. Peterson wasn't just a trader. He was a handler. He was directing a foreign military force on American soil. Before Eva could even process the full horror of the situation, Peterson's head snapped up. His eyes widened in shock and panic as he saw her standing there. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the hum of the servers the only sound in the room. Rostova, he stammered, his hands instinctively moving to close the chat window. What are you doing here? This is a restricted area. I know what you're doing, Peterson, Eva said, her voice low and dangerous. I know what you are. Panic gave way to a cold, reptilian cunning in Peterson's eyes. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a spy, and he was well trained. He slowly raised his hands, a placating gesture. Major, you're overwrought. You've had a stressful day. You disobeyed an order. You're probably going to be facing a court-martial. Let's not make this worse than it has to be. He was trying to play on her perceived weakness, her emotional state. He was trying to gaslight her. But Eva wasn't the same woman who had walked out of Davies's briefing room that morning. She had been forged in the crucible of combat and betrayal, and she was done being underestimated. As he spoke, his right hand subtly moved towards a panic button under the console. Eva saw the movement. She didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, not with the intention of fighting him, but with the intention of preserving the evidence. She grabbed a heavy-duty fire extinguisher from the wall and brought it down with all her force, not on Peterson, but on the server rack he was connected to. Sparks erupted. The monitors went black. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights that flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The data was gone, the connection severed. Peterson screamed in rage. You have no idea what you've just done. He launched himself at her, no longer a polished officer, but a cornered animal. He was bigger and stronger, and he slammed her against the wall. Her head hit the concrete with a sickening thud. The room spun. He grabbed for her sidearm, the standard-issue pistol in her survival vest. They wrestled in the semi-darkness, a desperate, clumsy struggle. Eva fought with the ferocity of a wildcat, but he had the advantage of weight and leverage. His fingers closed around the grip of her pistol. He was going to kill her, right here, and blame it on her unstable state. She would be the disgraced pilot who went crazy, and he would be the hero who stopped her. Just as he was about to rip the gun from its holster, the door to the shack burst open. Colonel Davies stood there, flanked by two armed MPs. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. Rostova, what in God's name do you think you're doing? He bellowed. Peterson saw his chance. He immediately released Eva and stumbled back, playing the victim. Sir, thank God you're here. She just attacked me. She's gone insane. She destroyed the entire comm system. Davies looked from the wreckage of his multi-million-dollar servers to the disheveled, bleeding pilot he so despised. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, confirmation of his own biases. Eva Rostova, the insubordinate relic, had finally snapped arrest. Her, Davies commanded, his voice dripping with triumphant disgust. The MPs moved in, grabbing Eva's arms. She didn't resist. Her head was spinning, her body ached, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. She had seen the truth, but she had destroyed the only proof. Peterson was free, and he would disappear. The people he was working for would cover Their tracks. No one would ever believe her. She was a discredited pilot with a history of insubordination, and he was a decorated hero. It was her word against his. As the MPs led her out of the darkened room, her eyes met Peterson's. He gave her a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, but underneath it, there was something else, a flicker of triumph. He had won, but as they stepped out into the harsh Nevada sunlight, Eva's eyes fell upon her A-10, parked on the distant taxiway. Salty and her ground crew were standing by it, watching the scene unfold with helpless fury. And a thought, cold and clear, cut through her pain and despair. She had destroyed the server, but she hadn't destroyed the source. The data from her jet's flight recorder, the telemetry, the audio logs, the spectral analysis of the missile that had been fired at her, and most importantly, the recording of the ghost signal.it was all stored in the black box of her Warthog. Her ugly, antiquated, forgotten Warthog. The evidence wasn't in the shiny new hangar. It was in the relic. A new, desperate plan began to form in her mind, a gamble so audacious, so insane, that it might just work. She had to get back to her jet. It was her only hope, but as the MPs marched her towards the base stockade, she saw a black, unmarked sedan pull up next to the F-35 hangar. Two men in dark suits got out and spoke quietly to Peterson. He nodded, and without a backward glance, got into the car. It sped away, leaving the base via a private exit. He was running. They were extracting him. The window of opportunity was closing. Whatever evidence was on her jet, she had to get to it now, before they found a way to erase that, too. She looked at the two MPs holding her, then at the 50 yards of open tarmac between her and her squadron's area. It was an impossible distance. Then, the base-wide alert sirens began to wail. Not the drill siren. The real one. A voice, amplified and urgent, echoed across the flight line. All personnel, this is not a drill. We have an active threat. Unidentified aircraft have breached the base's perimeter. I repeat, we have bogies inside the wire. Real world. This is not a drill. Eva's head snapped up. She looked towards the mountains, the same direction the black sedan had gone. And she saw them. Two sleek, dark aircraft, their silhouettes. Unlike anything in the US inventory. They were the same type that had attacked her in the valley. They weren't up for aggressors. They were real, and they weren't flying towards the base. They were flying towards the runway, towards the one aircraft that had seen their secret technology and lived to tell the tale. The one aircraft that held the proof of their existence. They were coming to kill her and to sanitize the last piece of evidence, her A-10 Warthog. The MP stared, frozen in disbelief. In that moment of shock, Eva knew it was her only chance. She stomped down hard on the instep of the MP to her right and drove her elbow into the gut of the one on her left. They grunted and released her. And she ran. She ran like she had never run before, not towards safety, but towards the cockpit of her jet, as two enemy assassins screamed in from the sky, the cannons already beginning to spin, the world dissolved. Into a mad, desperate sprint. The roar of the incoming enemy jets was a physical blow, a wave of sound that vibrated through the soles of Eva's boots. The tarmac stretched before her, a vast, empty expanse. 50 yards felt like 1,000. Miles. Behind her, she could hear the MP shouting, but their voices were swallowed by the rising shriek of the approaching aircraft. They weren't shooting at her. They were frozen, like everyone else on the flight line, staring in stunned disbelief. At the impossible sight of a real-world attack on Creech Air Force Base, Salty Petrovsky saw her coming. The grizzled crew chief, who had been watching the drama unfold with a sense of impotent rage, didn't hesitate. He wasn't a pilot, but he had spent 30 years keeping these warthogs alive, and he knew them better than he knew his own children. He understood, with a terrifying clarity that bypassed all logic, what was happening. They were coming to destroy the proof. Get her in the air. Salty bellowed to the rest of the ground crew, his voice a gravelly roar that cut through the paralysis. Now, go. He ran to the cockpit ladder and slammed it into place against the fuselage of Eva's A-10 just as she reached the aircraft, gasping for breath. Go, Major. Get up there, he yelled, pushing her towards the ladder. Eva scrambled up, her muscles screaming in protest. As she hauled herself over the side of the cockpit, she saw the enemy jets line up for their first strafing run. They were sleek, angular, and black as polished obsidian. They looked like something out of a science fiction movie, their design hinting at advanced stealth and aerodynamic capabilities that made the F-35 look like a biplane. Salty was already on the ground, frantically connecting the external power cart. "We are hot. Light the fires." Eva's hands flew across the console, her movements a blur of muscle memory. She didn't have time for a full pre-flight check. This was a scramble start, the kind you only practice for in your worst nightmares. Switches flipped. Buttons pressed. The APU whined to life, and with a deep, hungry roar, the twin TF-34 engines began to spool. The first enemy jet opened fire. The sound of its cannon was utterly alien. It wasn't the deep, guttural BRT of her Avenger. It was a high-pitched, terrifying shriek, like tearing silk, and it fired rounds at a velocity she had never witnessed. A line of incandescent purple traces stitched across the tarmac, chewing up the concrete and missing the A-10's tail by inches. They're using plasma rounds. Salty screamed over the intercom, his voice tight with disbelief. Their guns are firing plasma. Eva's mind reeled. Plasma cannons. That explained the instant disintegration of the tank, the way it had been disassembled rather than just blown up. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was a generational leap beyond anything she knew existed. Who were these people? "Get out of here, Salty." Eva yelled as she slammed the canopy shut. "Not a chance, Major." The crew chief's voice came back, steady and defiant. "We are with you. All the way." The second jet made its pass. This time, it wasn't aiming for the plane. It was aiming for the ground crew. Eva watched in horror as a stream of purple energy bolts slammed into the power cart Salty had been standing next to just seconds before. The cart vaporized. Salty had thrown himself flat on the ground, and the blast wave washed over him, but he was alive. He was alive, and he was still trying to get her airborne. A white-hot rage, pure and absolute, burned away Eva's fear. They had tried to kill her crew. They had tried to kill her family. This was no longer about evidence or court-martials. This was personal. This was vengeance. "I'm moving," she said, her voice a low growl. She pushed the throttles to the wall and the A-10 lurched forward, taxiing straight for the main runway. She didn't have clearance. She didn't have a flight plan. She had a full load of fuel, a belly full of 30mm combat mix, and a score to settle. As she swung onto the runway, she saw Colonel Davies standing near the control tower, his face pale with shock, his authority rendered utterly meaningless. He was a man who had built his entire world on rules, procedures, and the predictable flow of power. And now, his world was literally being torn apart by futuristic jets with plasma cannons. He could only stand and watch as the pilot he had tried to destroy became the base's only hope. The two enemy jets banked for another run, this time coming at her head-on. They were planning to finish this on the ground. "You're not getting off the ground, Relic," a voice suddenly hissed in her helmet. It was heavily distorted, filtered through some kind of digital scrambler, but the language was perfect. Unaccented English. They had hacked her frequency. They were talking to her. "You saw something you shouldn't have seen," the voice continued, cold and mocking. "Now you and your museum piece are going to be erased." Eva ignored him. She kept the throttles firewalled, the runway markers flashing past in a blur. The A-10 was a heavy beast, slow to accelerate. It felt like she was trying to take off in a river of molasses. The enemy jets were closing fast, their plasma cannons glowing with terrifying intensity. Just as they opened fire, Eva did something that defied every textbook on air combat. She didn't lift off. Instead, she slammed on the brakes and swerved the A-10 hard to the right, skidding off the runway and onto the rough, sandy soil of the infield. The landing gear screamed in protest, but it held. The Warthog was built. 4 unimproved airstrips, 4 dirt and gravel. It was designed to be abused. The volley of plasma bolts, aimed at where she should have been, tore massive, molten furrows into the center of the runway, rendering it useless for any other aircraft. They had just trapped themselves on the base with her. The enemy pilots, clearly surprised by her unorthodox maneuver, overshot her position. As they climbed and banked to re-engage, Eva saw her chance. She was off the runway, but she still had momentum. She pushed the throttles forward again, bouncing over the uneven terrain, and aimed herself back towards the runway at an oblique angle. "What are you doing, you crazy woman?" The distorted voice spat in her ear. "You can't take off from there." "Who said I was taking off?" Eva growled to herself. She hit the runway again, just long enough to gain a little more speed, And then she did the unthinkable. She steered the A-10 directly towards the F-35 hangar inside the control tower. Colonel Davies watched in horror. She's lost her mind. She's going to crash into my hangar. But Eva had no intention of crashing. She was using the hangar as a shield. She raced towards it, the two enemy jets now screaming in on her tail, firing relentlessly. Plasma bolts impacted all around her, kicking up clouds of sand and concrete. She ducked her head instinctively as her cockpit's armored glass deflected. A glancing hit with a deafening crack. T the last possible second. Just as the nose of a warthog was about to smash into the hangar doors, she yanked the stick hard left and hit the brakes again. The A-10 performed a gut-wrenching, dust-billowing ground loop, spinning 180 degrees to face the direction she had just come from. The maneuver was ugly, brutal, and something no other jet could have survived. Her pursuers, locked into their attack, run and traveling at over 500 knots, couldn't react in time. They screamed past the hangar, their plasma fire chewing up its reinforced walls, and now they were directly in front of her. They were in her sights. Eva didn't waste a second. Her thumb was already on the trigger. She was on the ground. Her aircraft damaged, but her gun was pointed right at them. "This is for my crew," she whispered. B.A.T. The Avenger cannon erupted. The ground shook. The air crackled. A stream of depleted uranium rounds, each the size of a milk bottle, tore through the sky. She wasn't aiming for a clean kill. She was aiming to cripple, to wound the trailing enemy jet, caught completely by surprise, took the full force of the burst in its right wing. The advanced composite material, designed to defeat radar, offered no resistance to the raw, kinetic fury of the A-10's gun. The wing shredded, disintegrated, and the aircraft, its aerodynamics destroyed, began to tumble out of control. It cartwheeled through the air and slammed into the desert floor a mile from the base, erupting in a massive, silent fireball. The lead pilot, seeing his wingman destroyed, let out a scream of pure rage over the open channel. He broke off his attack and climbed vertically, the sheer power of his engines carrying him skyward at an impossible rate. He wasn't running. He was repositioning. He was coming back for her, and this time, there would be no tricks. Eva knew she couldn't stay on the ground. She had a moment's grace, nothing more. She pushed the throttles forward, bouncing back onto the cratered runway. The A-10, battered but alive, clawed its way into the air. She was flying, but as she gained altitude, a new, chilling reality set in. She had killed one of them, but the other was a superior fighter in every conceivable way. He was faster, more maneuverable, and his weapons were from the future. And now he was above her, in his ideal attack position. Worse, the data from her flight recorder, the very evidence she was trying to protect, was now in the most vulnerable place imaginable, flying through the sky in the belly of a jet that was being actively hunted. "You're dead, Rostova," the voice in her helmet hissed, no longer mocking, but filled with a cold, murderous promise. "You, your plane, and your secrets. I'm going to burn you out of the sky." Eva looked at her flickering instruments. Her port engine was still running rough. Her hydraulics were leaking. Her canopy was cracked. She was alone, outgunned, and flying a crippled jet against a foe from tomorrow. The odds weren't just long, they were non-existent. But as she looked down at the base, at the men and women who were counting on her, at the smoking ruin of the runway that she had created, she knew she couldn't run. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a vow. She would not let this enemy win. She would not let her crew's sacrifice be in vain. She had to survive. She had to get the data out. But how could you fight a ghost? Especially a ghost that was about to send you to your grave. The sky over Creech had become a private coliseum, and Eva was the gladiator facing the lion. The enemy pilot was a master. He stayed high, using his superior speed and energy to make slashing attacks, forcing Eva to constantly bleed altitude and energy in defensive breaks. He wasn't trying for a quick kill with his plasma cannon anymore. He was dissecting her, taking her apart piece by piece, enjoying the slow, inevitable victory. A missile streaked from his wing, not a plasma bolt, but something more conventional. Faster, Eva slammed her stick to the side, dispensing a cloud of flares. The A-10, with its powerful engines and huge control surfaces, responded with a grunt, wrenching itself out of the missile's path. But the maneuver cost her. Her damaged port engine sputtered, coughed, and then went silent, its turbine winding down with a mournful whine. A chorus of new alarms screamed for her attention. She was now flying on one engine, a sitting duck. "Your machine is dying, Major," the enemy pilot taunted, his distorted voice a poison in her ear. "Just like your pathetic era of warfare. Give up. It will be less painful." "Go to hell," Eva gritted out, her knuckles white on the control. Stick. She needed a new plan. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't outclimb him. But she could outthink him. Her eyes scanned the horizon, the jagged peaks of the Spring Mountains to the west. An idea, born of desperation and an intimate knowledge of her aircraft's unique strengths, began to form. It was a maneuver so dangerous, so contrary to every rule of aviation, that it was known only in A-10 circles as the Reaper Scythe. It was a myth, a bar story. No one had ever actually done it in combat and lived on the ground. A strange alliance had formed. Colonel Davies, his face ashen, stood beside Salty Petrovsky at the edge of the ruined runway, both men watching the lopsided dogfight through binoculars. The colonel's world had been turned upside down. His procedures, his authority, his entire career had been rendered irrelevant in the face of a real enemy. All that was left was the raw, terrifying truth of combat, and the one pilot he had despised was the only thing standing between his base and annihilation. "What is she doing?" Davies asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She's flying towards the mountains. She's letting him get on her tail." Salty didn't lower his binoculars. He had seen Eva practice low-level flying in those canyons for years. "She's not letting him," the crew chief said, a flicker of hope in his voice. "She's luring him. She's taking him to her office." Eva pushed her remaining engine to its limit, flying straight and level towards the highest peak. The enemy pilot, sensing the kill, closed the distance, his guns glowing. This was it. The final, inescapable blow. "Goodbye, Major," the voice said just as he opened fire. Eva did the impossible. She cut the power to her good engine, deployed her massive air brakes, and fired her GAU-8 Avenger, not at the enemy, but straight down at the ground. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The A-10, already designed for incredible stability, became an anchor in the sky. The 30-ton aircraft decelerated with a bone-jarring shudder, as if it had hit a wall of invisible concrete. The enemy pilot, traveling at nearly twice her speed, and expecting her to continue her forward flight, was caught completely by surprise. He shot past her, his plasma bolts searing the empty air where she had been a second before. For a brief, stunning moment, the hunter had become the hunted. The sleek, futuristic jet was now directly in front of Eva's nose that it was a window of. Less than 2 seconds. Eva's thumb was already on the trigger. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the enemy cockpit, the pilot's head snapping around in disbelief. She saw the intricate, alien design of his engines. And she poured every last ounce of her rage, her grief, and her defiance into one final, sustained burst from the Avenger. B.T. The 30mm shells didn't just hit the enemy aircraft, they tore it apart. The rounds, designed to kill tanks, found no purchase in the lightweight airframe. They passed straight through, gutting the machine from tail to nose, shredding its engines, its flight controls, its very soul. The jet tumbled, end over end, silent and dead, before exploding in a brilliant flash that momentarily outshone the sun's silence. The sudden, deafening silence in her helmet was broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing and the one remaining engine sputtering back to life. She had done it. She had won, but the victory was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of her situation returned. Her aircraft was barely flyable. She was losing hydraulic fluid fast. And then, a new voice, cold and familiar, came over her radio. "Excellent work, Major Rostova." It was Lieutenant Colonel Peterson. "The traitor, I knew you were resourceful," he said, his voice no longer distorted, but clear and calm. "That's why we chose you for this little field test. We needed to see how our new assets would perform against your best. You've provided us with some very valuable data." Eva's blood ran cold. "Peterson, where are you?" "That's not important. What is important is the data on your flight recorder. We can't have that falling into the wrong hands. It would be embarrassing." This was the first twist. The battle wasn't over. It had just changed. This was never just about testing new jets. It was about stealing American military secrets, And she was the final loose end. You're too late, Peterson, Eva bluffed, her mind racing. I've already transmitted the data to a secure server. Peterson laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Did you? Because my sources tell me your data burst transmitter was damaged in the first pass. No, Major. The only copy of that data is in the black box sitting right behind you. And we have a contingency for that. Suddenly, a new icon appeared on her threat display. A surface-to-air missile site. It hadn't been there before. It was hidden, a pop-up threat. And it was close. The Colonel was so helpful, Peterson continued, his voice dripping with condescending pleasure. He was so obsessed with his new F-35s, he fast-tracked the installation of our new automated defense network. A little gift. From a friendly defense contractor. He never even read the fine print on the software license. This was the second twist. The ultimate betrayal. The base's own defenses, the very system Davies had championed, were now being turned against its only defender. Davies, standing on the ground, heard Peterson's transmission over the command channel. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He looked at the new defense network console that had been set up near the tower. It was active, and it was targeting Eva. His pride, his ambition, his blind faith in technology had led to this. He had personally signed the death warrant of the pilot who had just saved his base. Override it. Davies screamed at the technicians. Shut it down. We can't, sir. A young airman cried out, his hands flying over the keyboard. It's locked us out. It's not responding. A missile launched, a white spear climbing towards Eva's crippled A-10. She had no flares left. She had no speed. She had nowhere to go. This was it. The end. She closed her eyes, a strange sense of peace settling over her. She had done her duty. She had protected her people. She thought of Salty, of Rico, of the men in the valley, and then she heard it. The most beautiful sound in the world. BRT. It wasn't her gun. It was another A-10. Rico. He had managed to get his own Warthog, the one with the hydraulic leak, back into the air. He swooped in from nowhere, his Avenger cannon spitting fire, and he shot the missile out of the sky. Scratch. One Sam. Rico's voice cheered over the radio. No one messes with my lead. Eva's eyes snapped open. She wasn't alone. On the ground, Davies watched, his mouth agape. His entire philosophy of warfare, of standoff weapons and untouchable jets, had crumbled to dust. He had been saved, his base had been saved, not by his billion-dollar F-35s, but by two battered, bleeding, 50-year-old warthogs that had refused to die. It was the ultimate, most profound humiliation. Eva, with Rico flying cover, limped her shattered jet back towards the base. She couldn't make the runway. She brought it down in the desert, the landing gear collapsing, the A-10 skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust and glory, its tough titanium bathtub protecting her from the impact. When the rescue crews finally pulled her from the cockpit, the first person she saw was Colonel Davies. He looked older, smaller, defeated. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, and in his eyes, for the first time, Eva saw something that looked like respect. He then walked over to the MPs who were hovering uncertainly. Leave her alone, he said, his voice hoarse. Take me. He had accepted his role in the betrayal, his negligence that had almost cost them everything. It was the beginning of his penance. The data from her flight recorder was recovered. It was undeniable proof of Peterson's treason and the existence of the shadowy organization he worked for. The investigation that followed reached the highest levels of the Pentagon. The friendly defense contractor was exposed as a front for a foreign power, stealing technology under the guise of partnership. Peterson was never found, but his network within the military was dismantled. Weeks later, Eva stood on the tarmac, watching a new A-10 being prepped for her. Her old one was too damaged to be repaired, but it was being transported to the National Air and Space Museum, a testament to its final, legendary flight. Her command was restored, and her squadron, the Flying Tractors, were now the most respected unit on the base. A young F-35 pilot approached her, his face humbled. Major, he said, we were wrong. About you. About the hog. Eva just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. She looked up at the sky, her gaze distant. The war against Peterson's organization was just beginning. But they had made a critical mistake. They had shown her their face. They had tried to kill her family. And they had taught her that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the newest or the fastest. It's the one with the most scars, the most heart, and the unbreakable will. To get back up, no matter how many times it gets knocked down. The colonel had said any jet would do. He had frozen in terror when the enemy appeared. But he froze in something else, awe, shame, and a terrible, clarifying understanding, when her A-10, a ghost from another time, had appeared overhead to save them all. And in the end, it was the only jet that could.